You're in the middle of a conversation that never happened. Maybe it's an argument you won. Finally, maybe it's someone apologizing to you with exactly the right words. Maybe it's a version of your life where things went differently, where you said the thing you were too afraid to say, where someone stayed, where you were chosen. And for a moment, it feels almost real. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches. You feel the emotion as if it's actually happening. Then someone calls your name and you're back. If you know this feeling, not as a passing daydream, but as a place you return to, again and again, this video is for you. Because what's happening inside your mind is not laziness, it's not immaturity, and it is definitely not something to be ashamed of. It is something worth understanding deeply. Most people think of daydreaming as light, drifting, the mental equivalent of staring out a window, but for some people it is something else entirely. The imaginary conversations feel charged. The inner narratives are detailed, emotionally rich, and sometimes more satisfying than anything happening in the real world. Psychologists studying this pattern have noticed that the people who experience it most intensely aren't checked out, they are deeply checked in, just not to what's in front of them. What the brain is doing in these moments is fascinating. When you slip into a vivid inner scenario, your brain's default mode network activates. The same network involved in memory, self-reflection, and imagining the future. This isn't a malfunction. It's one of the most sophisticated things a human brain can do. The problem isn't that it happens. The problem is when it becomes the primary place where emotional needs get met. There's a term for this at its more intense end: maladaptive daydreaming. It was first formally described by psychologist Eli Soma, and it refers to a pattern where rich, immersive fantasy becomes so absorbing that it interferes with real life. But here's what most descriptions miss. This isn't just distraction. The inner world of someone who daydreams this deeply often has its own characters, its own continuity, its own emotional logic. It isn't random. It is constructed. And it has been built piece by piece in response to something. People who experience this often describe it as the one place where they feel fully alive. Not numb, not on edge, not performing, just present. And that tells you something important. It tells you that the fantasy world isn't filling empty time. It's filling an emotional gap. The fantasy world tends to feel safer than reality for very specific reasons. In your imagination, you control outcomes. You can replay a painful moment until it ends the way you needed it to. You can be seen, valued, and understood without the risk of rejection. Real relationships require vulnerability without guarantee. The inner world asks for nothing and gives you everything you've been quietly starving for. This is why people don't just stumble into these patterns. They get pulled in, especially people who are emotionally sensitive, who feel things more intensely than those around them, who have experienced environments where expressing needs felt dangerous or pointless. The fantasy world doesn't judge. It doesn't leave. It responds exactly the way you need it to. And here's something crucial. This pattern is not primarily about being creative or highly intelligent, though those traits often coexist with it. It is about depth of absorption, the capacity to become fully immersed in internal experience. Some people feel the world more, process it more, and when the outside world becomes too much or not enough, the inside world becomes the refuge. But there's a shadow side that doesn't get talked about enough: the shame spiral. You spend an hour lost in a scenario, you come back to reality and feel the weight of everything you didn't do, didn't say, didn't face. So you feel bad about yourself. And what soothes that feeling? Going back. The fantasy becomes both the escape and the source of the guilt that makes escape feel necessary. It repeats, not because you are weak, but because the cycle is doing exactly what cycles do: self-reinforcing, feeding itself, getting harder to interrupt. Understanding this loop is not about judging it, it's about recognizing that the relief is real and the shame is also real, and neither of them is the whole picture. If you step back even further and ask where this all began, the answer is often quiet and early. Many people who develop intense inner worlds did so in environments where the outer world was unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, or unkind. A child who doesn't feel safe expressing emotion outwardly learns to process inwardly. A teenager who feels invisible among people they love learns to create connection in their mind. The imagination wasn't an indulgence, it was a solution. A quiet act of survival dressed up as distraction. This matters because it reframes the entire pattern. You didn't develop this because something is wrong with you, you developed it because something was missing or something hurt, and this was the most elegant coping mechanism available to you at the time. So what do you do with that understanding? The goal is not to eliminate the inner world. That would be like responding to a person's deepest coping strategy by simply taking it away. The goal is to understand what it is doing for you. What emotional need does it meet? What does the fantasy give you that you haven't found a way to access in reality? Closeness, safety, recognition, control. When you can name what the inner world is providing, you can start asking a different question, not how do I stop this, but how do I begin to find some of this outside of my own head? That is a question worth sitting with. There is something else worth naming. something that often gets completely overlooked. The richness of an inner world this vivid, the emotional complexity, the narrative depth, the sensitivity to nuance, these are not neutral. They are a form of depth that has simply never found a safe enough place to land. People who live this way often have a capacity for empathy, for meaning-making, for emotional understanding that most people never develop. It has been turned inward because turning it outward felt too risky, or went unmet too many times. That depth is real, and it deserves more than a life spent in secret. If you recognize yourself in any of this, I want to leave you with something that isn't advice. Exactly. It's more of a reframe. You are not broken, you are not weak, you are someone who can't handle reality. You are someone whose inner life became a place of refuge because at some point it had to be. That is an act of adaptation. And adaptation, even when it costs you something, begins with intelligence. The question now is not what's wrong with you. The question is what you might be ready to bring into the light. If this video made you feel seen, subscribe. There's a lot more coming on the psychology of inner experience, emotional patterns, and the quiet things most people never say out loud but everyone seems to feel.